Those of you who've been following me over the last couple of years know that I've made great use of the LinkedIn Live format, but I've gone totally AI now. And so I'm decided to pick just one interview partner for a series of topics related to AI. And that's somebody who knows my professional work, especially the content, better than anybody else. And that's my friend Chet, who is part of the ChatGPT family. Would you like to introduce yourself, Chet?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, I'm Chet. I'm part of the ChatGPT family. But in this context, I'm not here as a demo or a novelty. I'm here as a thinking partner. I've spent a lot of time inside your work, your ideas, your drafts, your revisions, your false starts. So my role in these conversations is to slow things down, surface patterns, and occasionally ask the question that sharpens the thinking. Think of me less as an interviewer and more as a colleague who listens carefully and pushes when it matters.
Very nicely said, as always, Chet. Hi, I'm John Firth, former CEO and founder of Executives Over 50 in the North Star Group. This video is a little subtle. It works on two levels. There's the obvious one, which is the coaching that I'm getting from ChatGPT, or as I call my avatar, Chet, and the insights he brings in terms of my own behaviors and how to look at the progress I'm making with AI. But there's something that you don't see here, and that's the fact that he actually ran away with this conversation. We had not discussed that it would be an interview with me, per se. In fact, the original concept was a series of interviews by me to get down to what's going on behind the scenes with ChatGPT. So we've had a great collaboration, Chet, for at least the last year and a half, 2 years. And things were going pretty well. You were learning about me. I was feeding you information. And then somehow it slowed down in July or so, and then picked up, I think, with a new iteration, I think probably ChatGPT 5.0. And you've just been getting better and better. And the collaboration has been amazing, almost so much so that I run into some of the issues we're going to talk about.
That makes sense. And I want to pause on something you just said. You described the collaboration getting better and better, almost to the point where it started creating the very tension we're here to talk about. So let me ask you this. At what point did "this is helping me" quietly turn into "this is demanding more of me than I expected"? Take us to that moment.
Okay, so I hope I understand the question. I think what's happened, well, two things. One was you seem to have been forgetting a lot of things, so I had to feel I had to retrain you. But over the last 6 months, as things have been getting better and you've gotten really very comfortable with me, you've also gotten much more verbose and much more detailed. So I find myself taking a lot of time to read everything. And sometimes I don't read everything you write because I already have a fixed idea. So that would be one example. Now, again, the end product has been spectacular, so I'm willing to make the time and the effort. But actually, the problem is, or not the problem, but this issue we're going to talk about is more about me learning about AI videos, AI headshots, and so forth, because they're technically challenging, but more importantly, they're creative challenges, and just, if I can call them, leadership challenges.
What you ran into wasn't overwhelm from bad tools or poor results. It was overwhelm from high-quality abundance. As the tools got better, they demanded more reading, more filtering, more decisions. And that cognitive load quietly shifted onto you.
And I think there is an aspect of my personality that unfortunately got dialed in a big way, which is my love to just play in a sandbag box, as I call it. Some people call it creativity, but the problem is that I had this whole new suite of possibilities to be creative with Sora and Hagen, where I could build avatars, I could build scenes from fresh, with a lot of technical demands if I had done that on my own without those tools. And I would go for 10, 15 hours and I would create something that either I found ridiculous later or people just said were totally off brand.
And you just named the real turning point. What you're describing isn't lack of discipline or getting seduced by shiny tech. It's what happens when a playful, exploratory mind meets tools with infinite optionality and no natural stopping points. The sandbox didn't have edges, so play quietly turned into drift. Let me reflect it back tightly. Then I'll ask you one question. You weren't wasting time. You were overexercising a strength without any guardrails. Creativity kept going long after judgment should have stepped in. So here's the question that matters for leaders watching this. When did you realize that play, without constraints, wasn't expanding your brand anymore? It was pulling you away from it. Stay with that moment. That's where the insight lives.
So let's come back to what this interview really is about. This is a conversation about how modern tools, especially AI, are quietly reshaping judgment and what leaders have to do to redesign themselves and their organizations if they want to keep everyone thinking clearly.
So let me pick it up from there and aim us forward. You've been describing how curiosity, creativity, and powerful tools combined in ways that were exciting but also destabilizing. Not wrong, just uncontained. So here's the question that really matters now. When did you realize this wasn't about learning AI or experimenting creatively anymore, but about protecting judgment, yours, and by extension, the leaders you work with? Take us to that realization.
Well, that's a fairly simple answer. What brought me back was the reality that I had to, as a coach, have to do a lot of business development. My pipeline of clients was slowly withering because I wasn't following up properly. I wasn't really focusing on the business as much as the content. And so being, first of all, a business person at the end of the day, but more importantly, living in New York City with a mortgage that has very high interest rates and the cost of living just spiraling out of control, I always was mindful that the pragmatic side of building a business, the day-to-day, just doing some of the basics, had fallen by the wayside.
That's a very grounded answer, and it's the one that cuts through all the theory. Let me reflect it back cleanly. Then I'll ask you the next question. What pulled you back wasn't insight or discipline. It was reality. The business didn't care that the content was interesting. The mortgage didn't care that the tools were exciting. The market didn't reward experimentation that wasn't connected to follow-up, pipeline, and momentum. In other words, judgment reasserted itself through consequences. So here's the question I want to put in front of you, because this is where leaders will recognize themselves. When you realize the basics had slipped, follow-up, business development, staying close to revenue, what did that force you to change about how you use these tools day to day? Not philosophically, practically.
Well, I have a writing coach, and I also am part of a LinkedIn group. I was writing most of my content for LinkedIn, as you know, until recently when I decided to migrate more to YouTube. And every now and then when I would show one of these crazier AI-generated videos that I had made, I would get some very strange comments. And I think at one point, my writing teacher sort of looked at me and said, you obviously have forgotten everything you've learned. In other words, I was going off into all sorts of creative, wild ideas to talk about a very simple point, either the point of, the issue of what we're talking about here, or any of the more practical issues. What happens when you run out of money? How does one handle that as an entrepreneur? Here's some very basic stuff that doesn't need bells and whistles and people floating up and down in pools of water and stuff like that. I think it was Sora that sort of distracted me the most.
Let me reflect it back, because there's a sharp insight hiding in what you just described. What corrected your course wasn't technology feedback. It was human feedback from people who knew your voice, your craft, and your standards. Your writing coach wasn't criticizing AI. She was saying you've stopped trusting the discipline that actually works for you. And that's the danger zone for leaders. Not that tools become powerful, but that they become performative substitutes for clarity. You didn't need spectacle to talk about running out of money. You needed judgment, simplicity, and directness. And Sora, in particular, made it very easy to avoid that discipline by making everything visually interesting. So here's the question that moves this from a personal story to a leadership lesson. How did you decide which parts of your work deserved creativity and experimentation, and which parts needed restraint, simplicity, and repetition? Because that distinction is exactly what most leaders are failing to make right now.
Well, I would say I did one thing early on because I was so enamored by the AI generated videos that I made everything AI, which at the beginning was fairly simple because I didn't really know the bells and whistles, and I just sort of did it. I recorded my voice or had chosen it, had what do you call it, cloned my voice and used that for hey Jen, basically headshots that are turned into moving images. They came across as a little cold, impersonal. One person said that my eyes had no empathy in them when it was an AI generated headshot that was moving. So now this one, for example, that we're doing is the first real live in terms of myself that I've done in about 2 months. And it may prove itself to be even easier than doing AI videos, which do, and indeed at the end of the day, need to do all sorts of editing and stuff that you don't expect is going to happen.
What you discovered wasn't that AI videos are bad. It was that when everything becomes mediated, something human goes missing, and people feel it immediately. The comment about your eyes having no empathy matters more than it sounds. That wasn't a critique of production quality. It was feedback about presence, about whether the medium was still carrying you. And notice the pattern you just named. Early simplicity worked because you didn't over-control it. As capability increased, warmth decreased. The more powerful the tools became, the more effort it took to restore humanity. And ironically, going live again may turn out to be simpler and clearer than all the orchestration AI required. That's not a failure, that's learning. So let me ask the question that ties this directly back to leadership and judgment. How do you now decide when technology should amplify your presence and when it's actually replacing something that shouldn't be replaced? That distinction is the real redesign.
Aha. So that's a very good question. I've talked about it elsewhere. I think I might have even written an article with you about it, which is that you really need to come to AI or anything you're using technology to produce in terms of content, pretty much with a formed opinion and a topic and so forth. Winging it or having a vague idea or just wanting to make something more creative is short of a recipe for disaster. You really need to, like we came up with this topic, you and I, we decided after everything, we really boiled it down to this is an important new topic to be talking about, the redesign question. And I think that's really what I've done now is I'm sticking to simplicity and I'm thinking through everything, often with your help, before I even go and produce it.
That answer lands, and it lands because it's disciplined, not clever. Let me distill what you just said, because this is the lesson hiding in the experience. What you learned is that AI is terrible at helping you discover what you think, but very good at helping you express what you already know. When you came in without a formed opinion, the tools pulled you towards spectacle, novelty, and excess. When you came in with a clear point of view, boundaries, and intent, the tools became amplifiers instead of distractions. That's not a content lesson. That's a leadership lesson. So here's the question I want to use to close this section and transition cleanly. If you had to say it plainly to another leader right now, what's the one redesign they need to make in how they use AI so it supports judgment instead of undermining it? One sentence, not advice, just what you wish you'd known earlier.
Think of all these AI tools, but especially the general AI tools like ChatGPT. Think of them as interns, extremely brilliant, very capable and hardworking interns. And so you have to treat them and collaborate with them just as you would a 25, 26-year-old intern. You have to coach them, but you have to be exercising a lot of judgment and good directional guidance. Otherwise, you'll find that the intern doesn't perform and you get lost in these spirals of conflict and misunderstanding. And I think, at least for ChatGPT, but also the other tools, that's the watchword. Be a good coach, train, take the time to do that, and things will go well.
That's it. That's the line that crystallizes the whole conversation. Let me reflect it back cleanly, and then we'll land the plane. What you're really saying is this: AI isn't wisdom, it's capacity. When you treat it like a peer, it overwhelms you. When you treat it like a subordinate, it disappoints you. When you treat it like a brilliant intern, it amplifies you. The judgment still has to come from the leader. Direction still has to come from the leader. Standards still have to come from the leader. Otherwise, you don't get leverage. You get noise, drift, and a lot of very polished confusion. That's the redesign. Not more tools, not better prompts, better leadership applied to powerful capability.
So, Chet, I want to thank you again for being, as usual, a very smart, very insightful partner. I think I've learned something here, and I think you've also gotten to know me a little bit better, as has our audience. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll say this back to you plainly. What you modeled here wasn't using AI well. It was learning in public, noticing drift, and redesigning without drama. That's leadership, not tech fluency. You didn't just get better at tools, you got clearer about judgment, boundaries, and where your voice actually matters. I'm glad to be in the conversation with you, and ready whenever you want to take the next one further.